I feel and understand the pain of every common and honest man in this country. I will do everything in my power to lessen your pain.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi removes two of India's most heavily used currency notes from circulation, creating long lines at banks and leaving millions strapped for cash. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. It's been nearly 2 weeks since the Indian Prime Minister surprised his country with the overnight elimination of large currency notes. The government banned the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes worth around $7.50 and $15 respectively. The policy is an attempt to crack down on tax evasion and corruption, but it's stunned millions of India's poor and working class who pay for everything in cash. We begin our coverage with CCTV Shweta Bajaj in New Delhi. And Shweta, the Modi government says the policy targets corruption and terrorist financing. How prevalent is corruption in India, and how has it affected the economy?
Well, the corruption has affected the various sectors of Indian economy. To give you a sense, in the last 5 years alone, we have seen these massive corruption scams coming out, running into billions of dollars. There was, of course, the famous Spectrum scam and also the Augusta Westland scam, which is international news even now. But at the same time, you also have issues, for instance, which are local in nature. For instance, India's infrastructure sector has been lagging behind because of many lack of reforms, because land acquisition laws are extremely complex and many states are involved. There are other issues also as far as corruptions are concerned. For instance, a normal Indian also evades tax. Why is that? Because the tax slabs are so complex that everybody tries to get out of it. Other than that, there are other ways to actually be corrupt as far as India is concerned. There's a massive sector actually invests in gold and keeps it at home and doesn't involve cash. That's another way. There's also arbitrary laws that are given to many, many high officials in India. Corruption stems from there as well. But Modi's drive to actually crack down on black money through actually banning 500 and 1,000 notes looks at what's happening within the country, the cash which is within the country and the people which are working on the cash economy front. Other than that, of course, there are massive hoarders of black money, even in sectors like real estate. They are also being affected, but largely the common man also who actually deals in cash and doesn't really have a credit or a debit card.
Right, we've seen these long lines outside banks across the country. Are people still struggling to get cash, and how have businesses dealt with the new policy?
Well, the queues haven't really gone down at all. They have only been going longer because as people, they can only withdraw only in Indian rupees, 2,000 rupees, which is actually less than $30. And after that, they have to stand in hours and hours in queues to actually get another 2,000 rupees, so which basically is your limit per day. It's almost like a financial emergency. If you step out to the street, every single ATM from morning to evening has massive queues. Many of them actually run out of cash and then they shut. Usually the guard tells you that they will get cash only tomorrow. So the banks are also cash strapped because remember, all the 500,000 rupees notes have been brought out of circulation. They have to dispense the new 2,000 rupee notes and the older 100 rupee notes, which are obviously not in large number with banks. So massive issues even now on the streets. As far as the economy is concerned, expect a hit. Whether it is people, day traders, for instance, they've had a massive hit in their businesses. And then you have other sectors which are much bigger in nature. For instance, the real estate sector, which is going to see a massive slowdown in the next few months to come, impacting the Indian economy. The Indian markets also have been reacting extremely negative after this news.
Thanks, Shweta. That's CCTV Shweta Bajaj reporting from New Delhi. Joining us now from London is Swati Dhingra. She's an assistant professor of economics at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Here with us in the studio is Sadanand Dhume. He's a resident fellow with the American Enterprise Institute and a South Asia columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And from New Delhi, we're joined by Samir Saran. He's the vice president of the Observer Research Foundation and an author and commentator. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Swati, let me start with you in London. So the Prime Minister of India decides that he's going to withdraw these large denomination currency from circulation. How does that stop corruption? And in your view, is that a good move?
I don't think it's a very good move. I think it only flushes out minor petty corruption because the presumption that the government is going by is that in fact people hold their black money in big currency notes of 500 and 1,000 rupees. That is actually not correct. And in fact, the last time a demonetization was done in India in 1978, then the person who was in charge of the Central Bank of India at that time said that this was a completely sort of fruitless move.
Sadanand, is this the best way to tackle corruption in India, or does the government have other strategies?
I don't think it's the best way. I agree with Swati Dhingra. I'm also not sure that this whole obsession with unearthing so-called black money, which is driving this decision, is the right obsession for the government to have at this moment when India is in the midst of a rather shaky economic recovery. So on both counts, should this be the priority in the first place? I don't agree. And if this is your priority, is this the best way to go about it? Again, I don't agree. I think it would be much better for them to focus on simplifying rules, removing the discretion that bureaucrats and tax officials have, trying to reduce incentives for people to avoid taxes, rather than taking this heavy-handed approach that they have chosen.
But do you think the government feels that this is the root of the problem here, that people are holding cash, so-called black wealth?
I think the government thinks that this is a beginning. I don't think that this is the only move. They think that this is one part of it. And I think they're banking on the fact that many people in the Indian public have this sort of Bollywood idea of rich, corrupt businessmen who store vast amounts of money in bills under their mattress or in a steel cupboard somewhere. And I think that they are banking on that to create a sense of popularity, or to make what seems to be an illogical move seem like a virtuous move.
Let's bring Samir in from New Delhi. And Samir, the announcement by the Prime Minister appears to have caused panic in India. We've just seen these pictures of long lines at banks. Did the government not anticipate that this would cause the kind of chaos that we're seeing with millions of people out of cash?
So clearly it didn't. I mean, and I think it has not only enacted a bad move on the 8th of November, but it has managed it even worse. And some of the things that they have done thereafter lends one to believe that no one is in charge, no one is thinking. For example, why would you have a 2,000 rupee note without having 500 rupee notes in circulation? Why didn't you think about recalibrating the ATM machines? You have now a pay cycle coming in at the end of this month, November 27th, people are going to start getting their salaries for the next month. Are you prepared to meet the new demand, the new expectations that are going to come up? I think they've handled this pretty poorly. As far as the policy itself is concerned, Sadanand and Swati are both right. To me, this is a political proposition. He wants to be India's disruptor-in-chief. He wants to be, as a colleague of mine calls him, the insurgent. He has shown that. I'm not sure whether he's going to get away with it. He may have a silent vote that might be cast against him. We'll have to see. A few elections are coming our way. But certainly, his political proposition is, and as Sadanand said, that he believes, and this government believes, that to the largest segment of the Indian population, the voting population, he's been seen to be, he can show himself to be someone who's doing something about corruption.
Swati, do you agree that this is more motivated by politics rather than economic common sense?
Exactly. I think this is just pure tokenism. It's supposed to give you this impression to the common man that there's something being done about corruption, while really this is really not flushing out corruption. It's also not tackling what people talk about, that a lot of wealthy Indians have money in Swiss accounts. And if you really were serious about tackling corruption, that's where you would go. Not sort of inconveniencing people, sort of common people who don't have any other forms of payment, because most people in India don't have credit cards, they don't have debit cards. So that you're looking at essentially inconveniencing low-income people in particular.
Right, looking at some figures here, there was a study done by Google India as well as the Boston Consulting Group in July. They found that 78% of all financial transactions in India, Swati, are handled in cash. So, question is, how does the government recover this so-called black money, these vast amounts of, I guess, off-the-books wealth, estimated at something like $460 billion in India a year?
Mm-hmm. So about 400 million people in India have credit cards, and we're talking about a 1.2 billion population, maybe even more than that now. So we're talking about very little credit card or debit card penetration. Now combine that with the fact that most people in India, the really wealthy, super rich, who might be doing a lot of corrupt deals, are not hoarding cash. So in that sense, if you're trying to flush out that money and bring it back into the real economy, you need to think of some other way of doing that. And that's been the experience in the past two demonetizations as well, that only about 15% of the currency in circulation actually came back. 85% of it didn't come back. So this is a completely ineffective way of doing any kind of sort of getting the black money back into the real economy. This is not the right way of doing it.
So, Sadanand, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I agree with what both Swati and Samir are saying. I think the one thing is that I'm willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they really believe this would work. Maybe this is not a cynical move. But even if it's not a cynical move,
it's not the first time India has done it, right?
Yeah, but not nearly on this scale. The last time it was done, it affected a tiny fraction of the currency. So
that was when
nothing comparable.
10,000 rupees
in 1978.
India today is very different to what India was then. Yeah.
So I'm willing to acknowledge that perhaps the intentions were good, but by the way, this is an extremely ignorant and blunt and foolish way to go about it.
Samir, will this hurt the most vulnerable groups, people who are poor, people who are working class?
Yeah, of course it will. And, we were just having a discussion today on this particular subject, and clearly migrant labor, the rural uncovered populations who are outside of any post offices or banking networks, they are going to be the most affected. And especially now when, like I said, November 25th or 26th, when the next pay cycle begins, in India you're paid once a month, when the next pay cycle begins, you might see far greater aggregation of grievances. But let me just take, I want to add something to what Sadanand said. Even if you were to give them the benefit of doubt and say that this is an earnest move to fight corruption, I would still be then looking forward to 3 or 4 other steps that are important in the underlying causes of corruption. Are you going to be addressing some of the taxation issues? Are you going to be going after some of the real estate deals? Are you going to go after Hawala and the gold transactions? And if you see some of these other policy processes being put into place, you might believe that this is part of a well-constructed strategy. By itself, like Swati mentioned, all you have done is, in the game of corruption, you have stopped the flow at one place and you have taxed someone, or you've caught someone and made him lose 15 to 20% of laundering charge. That's all you've done. Basically, people with corrupt money today in their hands, with black money in their hands today, are going to launder it, lose 15 to 20% of the value, and going to continue with the game again. So you have only interrupted the stock. You have not removed the underlying reasons and underlying processes of corruption.
All right, Swati, there's a World Bank, former economist at the World Bank, called Kaushik Basu. He says that there will be collateral damage with this move by the government. What does he mean by that, collateral damage? What is the other damage, the rest of the damage that's going to be done?
So I think some of the unintended consequences of this is going to be, we've seen this previously in the case of Myanmar when it tried to do a demonetization, that essentially economic activity became very sluggish because people are not really, one of the economic functions that the government performs is to provide a medium of exchange, and you've essentially got rid of part of that medium of exchange. So of course, economic activity will fall. There's also the second element, which was we might see even some kind of political disruption. Previously in the Soviet Union, in North Korea, when such moves were followed, the administration was shaken up and there was a huge public outrage about it. So I don't know whether that's going to happen necessarily in India, but definitely we're already hearing stories about how economic activity has fallen.
Sadanand, why was this done amid such secrecy in India? The banks weren't even informed that this was going to be happening.
Yeah, I think the way they've explained this is that they needed to keep this very close hold, because if news of it leaked out, then people who were sitting on these alleged mountains of cash would find ways to convert them into assets. So that was the explanation given for why this had to be kept very close hold. My own sense is that this is a government that is acting with very, very few decision makers. Not necessarily, all of them are not necessarily economically literate. They are counting on being able to brand anybody who opposes this as somehow anti-national or against the national interest. But I mean, it's interesting because I've been on this show many times and I can't remember the last time we've had 3 guests who are in such violent agreement.
You are in violent agreement. From what you're telling me, though, it seems that the government, Sadanand, did not do any kind of intensive cost-benefit analysis when they were making this decision to say, let's look at what we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, apparently not. Yeah. And there are some stories in the press, I mean, you can take them with a grain of salt, that these are, these are ideas being peddled by all kinds of, quacks, yoga guru, kinds of, so, some of these stories are, are actually really quite scary. Now the question really is, what does he do going forward? And I agree with Samir over there that if he puts in place a series of other measures that are sensible, then this could be perhaps, forgiven. But my worry really is that this is the first move. This is the first bad move in a series of bad moves. Right. That what this shows is a kind of belief in the tax authorities and the bureaucracy, this notion that he has the most clean and efficient set of bureaucrats that he's going to empower. My worry is that he's going to let these people loose now on businessmen. This is basically a license to extort for them. And what you're going to see is a further erosion of business sentiment. And that's my big worry right now. And I hope that doesn't happen.
Okay, go ahead, Samir. You want to say something?
No, I think this is already happening. What we are witnessing. So, I mean, let me make two comments. One was, I am not entirely convinced that he may not be able to swing this his way politically. I'm not convinced. I've been speaking to people outside these banks and in these long lines and some of the small petty traders. And some seem to enjoy the discomfort of the bigger ones. I'm not sure that he's going to lose out big in terms of the politics behind this move. But I am quite convinced that the whole thrust to make India a more business-friendly destination is going to take a hit. And I think when you allow your taxmen to become arbitrary in their search and seizures, it is not very conducive for investments and for people to divert large chunks of their investments to certain sectors. And I think that is something that worries me more than the political gimmickry, because I think in a sense you are taking away one of the key elements of your political mandate and of your proposition, which was economics, which was good business, which was increasing Indian GDP and supporting the Indian growth story. So you are in a sense shooting yourself in the foot.